Right now, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu started this war on the assumption that they could bring about a revolution and a possible regime change in Iran through an air campaign. But slowly as the days progressed, the war shifted from an air campaign to what was needed was a naval campaign by the Americans. In that context, the fact that the Naval Secretary, John Phelan, has been sacked unceremoniously within the American military establishment. What do you think is happening here? Is this something that has happened to John Phelan because he was not willing to push the American Navy into the Strait of Hormuz, which a lot of military experts have said would turn into an effective kill zone if the Americans were to take their warships there? In your assessment, what is happening here?
We don't yet have any intelligence that Phelan was forced out because he didn't want to go along with more aggressive policies. That might come out. I won't be surprised, but he's very close to Trump, and he's been at odds with Hegseth and with Hegseth's main deputy for months now. So this is not a new development, but the fact that they would sack him in the midst of the war, when so much of the war revolves around naval efforts, is really shocking. But it shows the chaos within the Trump regime right now, where you've got people giving very, very different advice, and Trump is kind of cornered. But the danger of having a cornered rat like that, who's desperate, is he's capable of anything. And anything, to me, as the director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, raises the specter of the use of nuclear weapons. And I've written articles about this. One in Al Jazeera called Breaking the Nuclear Taboo, in which I said Trump has broken every custom, tradition, norm, most international laws, U.S. laws. The only thing he hasn't broken so far is the nuclear taboo, and he's being told by some of his advisors that that would make him the greatest president in history if he ever did that. It would make him the greatest criminal in history, is what the reality is. But Trump is not that rational. Right. And the things he's been saying, the things he's been posting, this is not a rational man. It's a man who's cognitively impaired, emotionally unstable, and very, very impulsive. So that's why we need diplomacy. We need a ceasefire, because we don't want to push him in that position. As John Kennedy said back in 1963, he said to put a nuclear-armed state in a position of either accepting a humiliating defeat or using nuclear weapons is either a total failure of statesmanship or a collective wish on the part of humanity. And so with Donald Trump, you don't want to push him in that position.
You know, Professor Kuznick, I want you to weigh in on this. You mentioned that some of the advisors of Donald Trump have been talking about the use of nuclear weapons, where Trump could, get a famous victory if he can actually do that. Are there any safeguards that are built in within the American military establishment where the top military leadership actually says that nuclear weapons can't be used, even if the president says so? Is there a guardrail that can actually prevent Donald Trump from doing so?
There's not a guardrail, but there is international law. And many veterans in Congress have been saying that the military should not obey unlawful orders. Using a nuclear weapon creates a mass casualty event at best. If it doesn't lead to full-scale nuclear war, in which we're all dead, even a limited use kills thousands and thousands of civilians. So even though there's nobody standing between Trump and authorizing the use of nuclear weapons, it is possible that military officials with a conscience will refuse to launch them. It's a long shot. I don't want to base the future existence of life on our planet on the idea that somebody's going to resist Trump's order. And we need a much firmer ground than that. But we're sort of in a desperate position if that's what he chooses to do, because of the way it's structured. There's absolutely nobody else whose permission or approval is needed. There's nobody standing between him and the nuclear codes and the authorization. Hopefully, that, however, others will intervene and refuse his orders if he gives those orders.
Right now, it is a far shot, as you mentioned, and there are some military strategists who've said that the thing that would actually perhaps deter Donald Trump from resorting to the use of nuclear weapons is if he were to use it in Iran, then the Russians would see it as a precedent to use it in Ukraine, and then the Americans would have to respond in kind, which result in mutually assured destruction. Do you think this is deterrence enough, provided this kind of logic can be worked out inside of Donald Trump's mind?
I think if he were a rational person, that might deter him. But he's showing signs. You know, Richard Nixon came up with the madman theory. Say, if you want to scare the other side into doing what you want, you act as if you're obsessed and irrational and that you're capable of doing anything, including using nuclear weapons. We know that Donald Trump knows that theory. We don't know if Donald Trump is playing a madman or if he really is a madman. Leading psychiatrists have issued reports and called on Congress to use the 25th Amendment and the cabinet to use the 25th Amendment to get him out. They're saying his psychological profile is much too dangerous for the person in charge of the world's second biggest nuclear arsenal. These leading psychiatrists, the heads of the leading psychiatric associations, have said Trump is mentally unhinged and irrational and cannot be trusted in that situation. But that doesn't mean that the people who have to implement the 25th Amendment has to start with J.D. Vance and more than half the members of the cabinet. They've shown no inclination to stand up to Trump so far. So again, we're risking the future of humanity on a very thin reed, on a very shaky basis. That's why I'm hoping that these reports out of Tehran are not as bad as we're seeing, because this is could quickly spiral out of control.
Indeed, that is how thin the thread is on which the future of humanity hangs.